Good afternoon. I'd like to invite my colleagues on the Energy and Environment Committee to make their way to room 1010. We'll give them a few minutes. Mr. Johnson, if that's okay, we'll give them a couple of minutes to see if we can get them here. At ease. He wants to go get them. Good stuff. All right, Mr. Johnson, we are going to proceed with today's October 15th. This is the Energy and the Environment Committee, and we do have a quorum. I'm joined today by Mr. Koretz and Mr. Blumenfield. I know Mr. Labange will not be here, and I believe Mr. Weezar will be here momentarily. If there is no objection, colleagues, I would like to take items 5 and 6 on consent. They are the items on a CAO report relative to the proposed amendment number 4 to a contract, as well as some additional amendments to another contract in item number 6. If there's no objection? Okay. Very good. So that will be the order. With that, we will take item 1, if it's okay, colleagues, by itself, and then we will take items 2 and 3 together, because the subject matter lends itself to that kind of conversation. If that's okay with you all, I'd like to call up staff to present on item number 1. Mr. Prieto?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Item number 1 relates to DWP report in response to motion Fuentes-Martinez relative to an update on the status of the department's feed-in tariff program and related matters.
Very good. If staff would identify themselves, and thank you, Mr. Ratepayer Advocate, for being here as well. We will proceed with Department of Water and Power first, and then we'll go to the Ratepayer Advocate.
And my name is Michael Webster. I am Assistant Director of our Power System Planning and Development. And to my right is?
My name is Jason Rondu. I'm the Solar Programs Manager at LADWP.
Good afternoon.
And you're going to have to drive. So next slide. And so our presentation today is made up of 4 components. Items 1 and 2 that you see on the screen to my right and your left address item number 1. And we will stop at the end of number 2. Number 3 addresses items number 2 and 3. And so when you're ready, we will start up on that. And then item number 4 relates to number 4 on the screen. So if we go to the next slide, just so that we're all grounded, number 1 was a motion that we responded to in June of this year with some details related to the feed-in tariff. And so what we'd like to do is not give you the same detail because several months have passed. So we want to give you updated information, the very latest that we have on these issues. And so first, we want to make sure it's clear what we're talking about is first, the feed-in tariff. This is a mechanism where a property owner or a developer can build a solar project and connect directly to DWP. So there's an interconnection agreement, there are interconnection equipment, and then we redistribute. We pay for the energy over a 20-year contract, and then we distribute all of the renewable energy to all of our other customers. That is what a feed-in tariff is, and it's distinguished differently than a net meter program, which we'll talk about next. It was modeled after programs in Germany that and other European countries like Spain and elsewhere, is that we wanted to develop something that would incent local development. And so after quite a bit of experience with Germany and others and bringing some of that experience here, we designed that program and we launched a 150 megawatt program, and it's made up of 2 elements. The first element is what's called the FIT 100 on the next slide, and let me give you an update of that, is that the FIT 100 was a set price program that changed price over time. So each allocation was 20 megawatts. So the first 20 megawatt allocation was priced at 17 cents. The second one was at 16 cents, the third at 15, and it dropped on the 4th tranche to 14 cents. So in total, we have today actually built is 2.7 megawatts. So that's about 2 megawatts more than what we had told you earlier. So projects are in that process of getting constructed as we speak, and we expect to have about 5 megawatts before the end of the year. Now, under contract, so once a developer goes through all the process and agrees to the interconnection costs, we sign a contract with them that says, go build. We have 8.2 megawatts under contract. Now, there's a lot of development going on, even outside of the contract, because we have 58 megawatts of FIT projects that are active. So they're going through the process of securing their leases, to doing their engineering, doing their designs, collecting their permits, as well as doing the interconnections. So we have a pretty strong pipeline over the next year, and we see that we're going to make tremendous gains literally over the next 6 to 8 months with substantial more projects coming online. And we currently have 118 megawatts on the wait list. Now, earlier you asked, what is the bid to cover ratio? So how many bidders do we have to the number of megawatts we're awarding? So, for example, a 3-to-1 ratio would be, if we had an allocation of 20 megawatts, we would have 3 times that, or 60 megawatts bid. That says that the program is very robust, there's a lot of interest, and it may be an indicator whether if this bid to coverage ratio is too high, maybe you're paying too much because it's getting too much interest.
May I interrupt you there? I mean, you said that that ratio tells you, it really gauges interest.
It gauges interest.
Right, in the program. It doesn't necessarily sort of reflect any real market conditions other than the fact that there's been a drop-off, and so we want a ratio that's higher than 1 to backfill that drop-off. But it doesn't really say, from a market perspective, anything other than interest.
That is correct. It's an indicator. It makes you think and makes you ask some questions. Does it make sense or not? Now, the coverage ratios drop in time because we have less that have applied for the 4th tranche. So the wait list on the 4th tranche you'll see on this screen is 2.9 megawatts is the 4th column and about the 5th line down. And so that's not quite as much of a waiting list as when we had the 1st tranche, which had a waiting list of 71 megawatts. So as the price comes down, you get a little bit less in the way of participation. This is what we expect. We're trying to find the best price for the City of Los Angeles as time goes on. You also asked how much we've spent on the program. The FIT 100 will cost approximately $24 million a year. That's still fairly accurate, and $530 million total. Currently, we've purchased 1,000 megawatt hours, and we've paid out a total of $184,000. This will be a much larger number now that we see more and more projects coming online. And what I wanted to do is point out on the 5th tranche, we expect, and this is the allocation, so the last 25 megawatts allocation, we expect to roll out sometime in January, but we will only do that after board actions because there's some community issues that need to be addressed and some discussions and some modifications that we're going to propose to the board in January. So that's the 100 megawatt set price program. We also have the 50 megawatt program. Now, this was bundled with a very, very large scale project. Our Beacon Solar project is a 200 megawatt project located about 17 miles outside of the city of Mojave. And what we conceived of is can we demonstrate you could build large utility scale and build local solar at the same time? So there's a commitment not only to achieve the RPS with utility, but that local job development moving forward. So we have awarded 2 contracts. SunEdison has been awarded 22 megawatts for the local portion, plus another piece out at the Beacon site. And Hecate has 28 megawatts locally. So the 200 megawatts in the utility scale netted 50 megawatts locally, and it was a competitive price, and the average price is about 12.5 cents. Now, SunEdison and Hecate have partnered with local developers. SunEdison is partnered with Permacity, a local developer that has a lot of experience in this area and for many, many years, and Hecate has partnered with Absolutely Solar, who has many, many projects locally. And so they are currently looking to build out their projects. 1/3 of their 50 megawatt commitment must be done by June of 2015. So they are developing projects, looking for properties, and trying to get those secured. And so I also wanted to let you know that we are starting to talk about what's next. So we are in the process of our 2014 Integrated Resource Plan. And part of that is to think about what type of renewables we need in the future, how much renewables, and really how much local solar makes sense. So we've started discussions on that. We've had workshops related to an expanded feed-in tariff program to get some input from the public. We are about ready to launch 3 workshops on our integrated resource plan later this month and early in November to get input on that, all to come together to say what makes sense for the City of Los Angeles. And so what we've conceived of for an expanded program is something that is, I like to call it the learn and grow model. While we can set maybe a fairly robust goal, and maybe that goal might be 150 megawatts plus another 450 for 600, what's really important to the utility is that we deploy in a sustainable manner and we can make adjustments. So what we conceived of is about 50 megawatts a year of deployment, and that each time we deploy a new 50 megawatt allocation, we can ask the question, does it make sense? Does it make sense? Is it meeting our renewables needs? Does it make sense from an integration perspective? Do we need to make adjustments on the contracts? Do we need more control? Do we need more metering? Because as we get to higher and higher levels of solar, we get to the point where we may find ourselves curtailing solar, selling at negative pricing, or potentially in a situation where we actually have to store it or some other mechanism, which could be very, very costly, and we need to plan far in advance for that. And so what we'd like to do is do it in such a way that our program grows over time, and that's an important feature of our discussion. And we also wanted to look at what others are doing, and currently what's called the Remap Program is a pricing program that the IOUs are following that allows prices to adjust based on supply and demand. So if there's a lot of demand on the program, maybe the price could be lowered. So, and so it adjusts over time. So if there's great participation, if there's not great participation, is that it moves. And that way it can keep track with changing market conditions. So as solar prices change, the market keeps track.
And when is that Remap program start?
The Remap program has started, and it has been working over the course of this year.
But in terms of the tranches, is that sort of affecting what's happening in the next tranche or the existing tranche?
Yeah, staff was not recommending a change to the first 100 megawatt program. We were going to change some of the policy issues related to some of the community comments, but not completely change the pricing mechanism for the 25 megawatts. So we saw this pricing change really being applied to an expanded program. Okay, so that's the update with the latest information based on your prior motion.
Very good. Why don't we go to the ratepayer, and then we'll take some questions from our colleagues. Dr. Pickle.
Can I get you to pull up my presentation?
Yep.
Next slide. I'm Fred Pickle, Executive Director of the Office of Public Accountability, Ratepayer Advocate. And my comments are on overall solar programs, not just DWPs, but statewide, comparing the investor-owned programs, both in feed-in tariff, net energy metering, and other programs. And I think it's important at the start to think about what's a success. If the City of LA was able to reduce all DWP carbon emissions to zero, that would reduce worldwide carbon by 0.03%. So what we do in terms of carbon reduction is more important as an example, and I think it's important we do it in a cost-effective manner that makes carbon reduction attractive for other players worldwide. And then I'm going to look at comparing solar programs for investor-owned utilities versus LADWP, details of some of the feed-in tariff programs, and a couple of my slides are not 100% up to date for what Mike just said, so I'll point out the differences, and then talk about the other local solar alternative, net metering, where we have a chance to be to expand perhaps with lower impact on the local economy, lower negative impact. Next slide. If you look at all solar programs statewide, as Mike mentioned, net energy metering is where the power is used inside the customer premises, and all the other programs, feed-in tariff, renewable auctions, and large-scale solar project procurement are all wholesale transaction where the power is the entire quantity of the power from the project is delivered to the utility and it goes directly into the grid in total. For net energy metering, the typical project size would range from 5 kilowatts for a typical single-family residential house to up to 1,000 kilowatts for the state limit on these projects. And then for the FIT programs, both for the investor-owned utilities and for DWP, those go up to 3,000 kilowatts or 3 megawatts. The renewable auction mechanism set a statewide standardized contract, and then the individual utilities selected in that auctioning process projects they liked. The size range for those projects it was or is now roughly 3,000 kilowatts to 20,000 kilowatts. And then for large projects, those are from 20,000 kilowatts to over 300,000 kilowatts or 300 megawatts. What's the price range or what's the value of the power? For net energy metering, it's largely the value of the customer bill reduction. There are some utilities that pay for excess energy beyond the bill reduction, but that is a complicated process. For FIT programs, that ranges, depending on the program and the date, from a little more than 5 cents to 17 cents. And for the renewable auction mechanism, the most recent auction where information is public is 7.1 cents. And the large projects right now, with one exception in Texas, are in the 6 to 7 cent per kilowatt hour range. There is one project that's claiming to be sold for under 5 cents in Texas. In terms of capacity, DWP's net metering program has a little over 100 megawatts. The investor-owned utilities have over 2,000 megawatts online. Our FIT program, as Mike just went through, we're now up to 80 megawatts solicited and 2.7 megawatts online. My chart is outdated in that box. The investor-owned utilities at last calculation in August had about 40 megawatts contracted, and only prior projects coming into the program late, projects that were already existing, are online. So they don't have anything online yet of the new contracts. In the renewable auction mechanism, they've solicited 1,000 megawatts of projects. About 850 megawatts were solar, and there are about 51 megawatts online. For the large projects, there has been 13,000 megawatts contracted. 6,000 of those megawatts are online, and about 1,400 megawatts of that is solar. So surprisingly, there are more megawatts of solar online in net energy metering than there are in terms of the large projects, at least what I've been able to tell for reports through mid-year. Next slide. To dig a little bit deeper on feed-in tariff programs, the pricing for DWP was fixed in early 2013 based on an extensive outreach program in 2011 and 2012. As Mike discussed, they're switching to a new approach in 2015. It's similar to the investor-owned utilities Remap, and the Remap is an indexed price program where they change the price for the individual utilities depending on whether or not the current block of power being offered or the last block of power being offered was overfilled or had less than 20% sign up. So less than 20% sign up, price goes down, or excuse me, price goes up. If more than 100% is filled, price goes down. And that price incremented down several times for PG&E, down a couple times and up a couple times for Southern California Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric filled their entire quota at the starting price for the program. For all utilities, it was 8.9 cents to start. For DWP, their pricing under current pricing for the FIT 100 is currently at 14 cents. Except for small projects where it's 15 cents, the average price for the FIT 50 is approximately 12.5 cents. In terms of solicitation size, for the FIT 100, we're doing this in blocks of 15 to 20 megawatts with a carve-out for small projects. The PG&E and Edison groups are going in blocks of every 2 months of 5 megawatts each, and SDG&E in 3 megawatts. The total solicited so far is 75 megawatts for DWP, and if you look at the total of PG&E, Edison, and SDG&E, they have solicited a total of roughly 40 megawatts. In terms of the remaining program, there are 25 megawatts remaining in the DWP program, but that's subject to potential changes, and then there's a new program after that. The other utilities, the solar components for the other utilities are a little over 50 megawatts more solar to be solicited. So what's the conclusion from all of this? Next slide, please. Net energy programs appear to be the largest overall solar capacity. There are a large number of big projects under construction, and I expect the big projects to pass net metering in the next, maybe this half, maybe early next year. But it was amazing to me looking at this work that distributed solar in the form of net metering had exceeded the capacity of the large solar. And then the intermediate-sized renewable auction mechanism and feed-in tariff programs have contributed only a small component to this overall effort. DWP's prior feed-in tariff prices are in excess of the other wholesale programs. IOU FIT pricing is now 40 to 50% of DWP's FIT pricing. And the renewable auction mechanism prices are also about 50% of LA's feed-in tariff. Relative to its size, DWP's net metering program is too small, and LA's FIT program is oversized by about a factor of 8, and the net metering is about a 20th of the overall net metering program. Scaled to the size of LA's customer base, it could be about 2.5 times larger and be comparable to where the other utilities are. Next page. For almost 20 years, a 5% standard for net metering was the standard before the PUC said they would go look back and see if they needed to adjust the program. If we applied the CPUC's definition of 5%, which is an unusual non-coincident peak standard, we estimate that a DWP net metering program that reached 5% would be about 600 megawatts of local solar. CPUC studies show low or no cross-subsidy between different customer classes among the investor-owned utility net metering programs, but there are differences in rate structure between the investor-owned utilities and DWP. We tended to have a flatter block structure than the investor-owned utilities. And one important thing to be a truly expanded component of the LA renewable portfolio is we would like CEC to allow net metered solar as bucket one renewable unless someone else has purchased those renewable credits on those projects. And that's really the quid pro quo for an advanced net metering program. To look at the chart in comparison to the 5% standard, the investor-owned utilities are 1.7% to 2.3%. PG&E seems to be growing very quickly right now at the rate of about 25 megawatts a month. So growth has been very high in that area in particular. And we're at about 0.9% of the non-coincident peak, estimating based on similarities between DWP's load and the other investor-owned utilities load. Next page. What's next? For the feed-in tariff now and in 2015, DWP has proposed a new feed-in tariff program that addresses competitive pricing similar to the IOU Remap formula. We're concerned about the pricing starting too high, but we strongly support this move to a more competitive pricing structure for the FIT program. In the long run, or in the short run, as suggested by Mike Webster, we need to monitor the progress of the FIT program, and I think we need to monitor it in the context of progress on net metering as well to make sure we're getting an appropriate mix. And on net metering, we need to develop a more effective net metering program for all customer classes. As part of the next rate case, we need to improve rate design for net metering, especially for the commercial class, and find a way for paying for excess energy at possibly prior year's average cost of purchase renewables, and address the evolution of inverter and battery technology and allow industry review of the standards to address the evolving interconnection standards. And it needs to be evaluated, monitored for possible cross subsidies between customer classes.
Thank you. Colleagues, questions? Mr. Koretz?
Yeah, I'm generally encouraged by our feed-in tariff. I think it has a lot of promise to get us towards meeting most of our energy goals that we've set for it. I also think, based on our conversation with Lucy Jones this morning on earthquakes, that it also makes sense to have more local solar on rooftops, et cetera, so that in the case of an earthquake, we aren't completely separated from most of our sources of electricity. Now, I know that the new tranche, I think, is being held before it's approved because of community concerns. What were the community concerns, and why is it being delayed?
So one of the community concerns that we heard was the development of ground mount systems. And when we originally conceived of the feed-in tariff, we really were looking at rooftops and making use of property that's not being used otherwise. And so we priced it at that. And so one of the things that we are looking at potentially doing at DWP is recommending that maybe there should be a price difference between a ground mount system and a rooftop system. And we're not sure exactly what that price is going to be yet, but that would put ground mount and rooftop kind of on an equal standing moving forward. So that's the type of discussions that we're having internally to figure out what we want to propose.
Any reason we wouldn't move ahead with this tranche fully and answer those questions with the next go-round?
Staff has been advised that they'd like by the board to consider these types of approaches and to bring back that discussion for board consideration.
Okay, well, just from my point of view, it seems like we should just move ahead full bore and answer that question in the next go-round with it, rather than delaying some possible additional capacity. Also, on another note, the LA Business Council Institute and UCLA prepared an online list of 7,000 available properties in LA that aren't involved in the FIT yet. Are you aware of that and actively connected to this list? And if so, how is it going to be used?
We're fully aware of that, and what we are recommending that the people that have been putting this list together is to get that in the hands of the developers. not only the Fit 100 developers, but quite frankly, the Fit 50 developers that are looking to aggregate large projects together and do a contract with potentially properties that are owned by one entity, so that they can do a contract with Costco or Home Depot and say that we can do all of your properties. So that list is very important for the developers to be looking at, making the phone calls and getting out there and selling their product to them.
So our outreach will be getting that information out to the development.
We believe that information is already out to the developers.
Very good.
One additional comment on those 7,000 sites. Those sites may also be attractive for net energy metering. So it's important to make our rates more accessible for the intermediate-sized commercial customers. I think the success statewide of the equivalent of 2 nuclear units of capacity for net metering solar, where we only have a small amount of implementation of FIT, I think we should not ignore the success in net energy metering and adapt our programs to simplify that as well, because we may have more rapid success and more local solar by that path.
Okay, and I've had some acquaintances in the 8th Council District that recently told me they wanted to get a FIT project together for their entire neighborhood, but that it's a lot of older housing stock, and they may need support beams to hold up the roof, and with those panels added. Is there any creative way that we've looked at to address those needs and allow homes that need that kind of reinforcement to participate in the program?
There's nothing that would prohibit their participation in the program, but the price that we've set forth is available to all. And if they can do the support structures that are necessary and then can still make money at that price level, then that's what they should do. So
we're not looking at any kind of subsidy for those structures?
No, there's no subsidy, because it's fair for all participants.
Well, in theory, although there are lower income areas where people would like to participate, but the homeowners don't have the money to invest in those additional structures. Obviously, I'm not speaking for myself. I think that's much less of a problem in my district. We have the opposite problem of people wanting to do it and too slow a process. But I think we should look at some of these subsidies so that it's not just the affluent areas that wind up being able to participate. So I hope we'll give that some look as well. Also, I'd like to see us look at targeting a program in addition to targeting low-income communities, but also using some workforce development programs like Homeboy Industries or Green Vets that we worked with before to help put our most at-risk populations to work. Have we looked at that in our FIT program and trying to find some way to make that connection?
So in the Fit 50 program, part of the decision factor was that there would be a local inclusion, that they would reach out to the local communities. They've submitted a plan which we reviewed, and now we're going through quarterly reviews of that plan to make sure they're following through with what they said they were going to do. So we expect that they will show progress on reaching out to the local communities and employing local people. Now, on our large-scale projects, we've also asked for them to reach out to local, and the recent approval of the Springbok project, they are partnering with Homeboy Industries so that they can get them into the workforce for that project.
Very good. Thank you.
No additional questions? Mr. Blumenfield?
Great, thanks. A very interesting presentation, and I'm really surprised to learn about that net metering is bigger than the large scale at this point in terms of what we're putting in. I expected the opposite. So that was interesting to me. Maybe you could help me. We've got a lot of numbers here in terms of different pricing for the different types, whether you're talking about net metering or FIT or large-scale solar, and some of the comparisons, although they're all useful comparisons, are a little bit of apples and oranges when you look at the large scale versus the distributive power and the benefits there. And I wish there were a way, and I don't, to get a comparison that takes into effect the other factors as well. Because obviously there are benefits to distributive power, as was talked about this morning. There are benefits in terms of the local economy, the reasons why we're making an investment that obviously costs more on a kilowatt basis than the long term. And it may not be so easy to just quantify that, but maybe we could talk about, qualitatively some of the differences in benefits of the FIT, net metering, and the large-scale program like the Remap, and how we should, as a council and as the public, what lens we should use to make a comparison to equalize those, so that when we see 5 cents and 14 cents, that we know, how to compare that difference. Not just the simple math of the difference in price, but what are the other things that we're getting and losing.
So when we launched the feed-in tariff program, we did have that discussion. So before the council took action, we did a qualitative discussion of the potential local benefits and the local job creation. Now, while we're not experts in this area, UCLA has recently released a study that showed the local economic development. And I think that some of these research universities should continue that effort to look at, are we stimulating the economy locally, especially for a lot of the structures and the connectors and the infrastructure to put the solar panels in, and is that developing in Los Angeles, and how much in the way of local job creation? But it's something that now that we have some experience in the UCLA study, we're starting to see more and more some quantitative numbers that we can at least look at and consider.
There are a couple trade-offs involved. One of these is versus large-scale solar and local solar, there's a transmission cost difference. But that's one to, or somewhere between 1/2 and 2 cents, depending on whether you count new transmission capacity or not. If it's just losses because we're backing off on those lines, because we're stopping importation to coal, then it's just losses. If it's adding new capacity, like Barron Ridge transmission, the number's bigger. The other step is job impact. Job impact for the large projects, the jobs are largely out in the desert, but it's still drawing to some degree on LA area, LA County, LA City workforce. In town, to count job impacts, we ought to start counting job impacts. We're having projects being measured, or being constructed. It's time to do that. Important thing to note is the relative success of net metering versus feed-in tariff programs. There's been a lot more constructed, so the job impact from existing net metering is a lot bigger than the job impact from the feed-in tariff components.
But that has to do with the success rate, not, the cost of putting in a net metering system.
Technology is very similar. It's essentially the same technology.
Right.
And it's the timing too. The solar incentive program started very early on, so we have many, many years of experience where feed-in tariff is really just starting to get rolling.
Well, I would love when you come back with this, on the next iteration of this, to put in some numbers there, even if they're just gross estimates, or rough estimates. It would help when we're trying to compare apples and oranges to at least know what those categories are and how much. I think everything qualitative can ultimately be put in some sort of quantitative formula, even with the understanding that life's not simple. But it does help to use that frame, for me at least.
And one of the things that we do need to be cautious of is comparing our feed-in tariff program with the Remap program that the IOUs have, because our service territory is very, very, very different than PG&E, Edison's, or San Diego's, where they have much larger properties available. And so we're seeing challenges of getting solar done even at the 12.5 cent range. So if we were to do an 8 cent feed-in tariff program in Los Angeles, it just would not work today. It may work 5 years from now, but today that pricing won't work. So when you compare LA to Southern California Edison, we are not the same service territory at all.
Right. And that's the apples to oranges kind of thing.
That's right, and I wanted to point that out for you.
And that is mostly a function of scale, right? So
it is mostly a function of scale. That is correct.
Okay, so when you're comparing the Remap to ours, maybe we need some sort of another coefficient there to compare the size to the size. If we really want to see how we're doing versus the others, there's got to be another piece to that equation.
It was part of the reason I started off with my discussion about at what cost carbon, at what cost do we do this. At some point, maybe we don't need to push for a lot of fit in the city of LA. Maybe we should be expanding activities near the city of LA, but in areas with more space to get the same local impact from that solar. If it's Antelope Valley or other areas, other open space areas near the city.
Right. Then we need to also look at the other impacts, of distributed power in our area, emergency preparedness, everything else, all of those sort of non-quantifiables that are a public value that we need to figure out how to quantify them so we can make a better comparison of our program.
Now, current inverters as installed, if power goes out or even if there's a large upset, will cease operating. And there's new inverter technology, new control technology that would allow those units to disconnect and keep at least the individual household or business operating to some degree, especially if paired with battery technology.
And that's being evaluated at DWP as we speak.
All very helpful. One notion, and I'll turn it to the chair, we can go back, with the particular question, maybe it's a minor point, I didn't understand the 31% cancellation rate and how that factors into this in terms of the Fit 100 program. I saw that in the figures, but I'm not sure what message I'm supposed to take from that.
Well, the reason we look at this is that we think, well, 17 cents is a very high price, and everybody will just absolutely rush to it, and every single project will get done. But the reality is that projects do get canceled because of getting access to the rooftops and the lease contracts that are being developed. Are they adequate for the landowner, the property owner, to contract with the developer to allow solar? So we're seeing that as one of the issues that leads to dropouts. We also see that there are many projects that are located in areas where it requires quite a bit of infrastructure improvement, so the interconnection costs are higher than they anticipated. So although we've put out averages of what they can expect to estimate, sometimes they're higher than that, and they can't make that business model work. So the reason it's important for us is we look at the success, because ultimately what we're trying to do is get a successful program. And so if we have a large dropout rate, we have to ask, why is that happening? What can we do to fix that or help that? And so that's why even at 17 cents and you have a dropout rate, there's something else there that you have to analyze before you start setting, brand new prices and brand new structures moving forward.
Okay, so it's not that I was trying to figure out, is there some correlation with the price and the cancellation rate? You're saying, in fact, maybe they're not correlated, they're independent.
Potentially they're independent because each allocation is going to have its own set of issues, but we'll see because the first allocation has a lot more experience because it was the first one. The experience for the second and third, they're starting to be active, and we'll start to see whether they're going to make it through or drop out. And of course, the fourth one we'll know much more later as the projects are developed or drop out down the road.
And last question, sorry. The folks who were listed, in terms of the different tranches, is there overlap in terms of the bidders for the different tranches? Are they the same bidders, or
no? Are they
all independent?
Well, not exactly all independent, but they have the opportunity to be on the waiting list. For example, in the first allocation, tranche number 1, but then they can apply for the second allocation. And so while they're on the waiting list, maybe they get picked up or they don't get picked up, they have the opportunity to move forward with the second tranche. So there is a little bit of overlap.
Because I could see how that could skew some of these numbers too. If you're getting, folks applying for the first, second, and third and just waiting to see where they get because they want the highest price to get on.
Well, they'll clearly want the higher price if they get picked up on the waiting list. And so I just wanted to correct a statement. I think I made an incorrect statement that staff has pointed out. The last tranche is not delayed. I may have said that. It is not delayed. It's planned to go in January. It has always been planned to go in January. We just need to address some modifications to address some of the community solar piece. But right now we plan on that going on schedule. So I believe I misstated that, and so I wanted to correct it for the record.
You know, just before I turn it over to Mr. Koretz, because I see he's got more questions, there's also a real, you'll remember, Bob, when we were in the legislature, when we went to a 33% RPS, there was over 50% sort of fallen out, at least by the PUC's accounting, because a lot of it was done on speculation. And so I don't know that we're going to really sort of drill down and understand why 31% is sort of falling out, but it seems like you all are cognizant of it, and as a result, you've got this bid to cover ratio that intends to at least backfill as quickly as possible sort of the folks that are falling out so that we can maintain the integrity of the program. Mr. Koretz.
Well, I do have more questions, but I think they'd be under the next set of items.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Well, I do have some questions. You know, I want to be mindful of the fact that it's been mentioned twice now that that somehow this UCLA Luskin report indicated that there is all of this newfound prosperity. What the report was, at least the way I read it, and please correct me, is that it was really a customer experience survey that people had as they were in queue to understand sort of how our process interfaced with them. And there's an expectation, according to them, that there is going to be $300 million in direct investment to the city, but it's not that we've realized it. I don't know, unless I'm incorrect, that there are programs in place and metrics that you all are monitoring, like project labor agreements or that sort of thing, that will let us know definitively how many people in communities like CD6 or 7 or 8 or 9 are being hired. I mean, we don't have any mechanisms in place to track that kind of hiring in basin. You might have them for the out-of-basin work, but you don't have them here, do you?
It is correct. We do not have the mechanisms to track that, and nor are we experts in those areas of looking at economic development. That's economists and others that need to be looking at those types of ratios, those types of metrics, and producing those reports.
But presumably, you know, one of the reasons we did into the feed-in tariff in 2012, looking back at those conversations, the idea was that there would be some local economic development for Los Angeles. And it appears, at least in the experience that I'm having in Council District 7, where there is some real unintended consequences, Mr. Koretz. I don't know that we can afford to sort of move on until we correct some of the things that are happening, namely the land use being sort of rejiggered from largely equestrian properties to ground-mounted solar farms. But setting that aside for a second, I don't know of a single green job in my district that comes home and rests at night in my district. And my hope is that as this progress in this program moves onward, because I'm a supporter and I do want to see it move forward, that we do take the opportunities to look back and see how it is that we're going to impact communities that could benefit from it. And so that brings me to the next point that I sort of want to ask you about, and I think Mr. Blumenfield was sort of speaking to it, and clearly the ratepayer advocate, I think, demonstrated it. It seems like we have a feed-in tariff goal versus a distributive generation goal. And so to the point that Mr. Koretz raised a second ago about having the ability for folks like in Council District 8 share in the prosperity and even in sort of the independence of having solar on site, it seems that net metering would be something that would fit for those folks, because as you all know, net metering gives people the ability to consume on site and then if there's excess, sell it at a retail value, thereby benefiting the ratepayer. Whereas the feed-in tariff, at least in my experience, is benefiting developers. And I don't have a problem with the model, but I do think that we should probably, given the information that we were seeing by the ratepayer advocate, we may want to consider a goal of distributive generation so that you have net metering, so that you have feed-in tariff, so that you have some of these lease options that you currently have, and equally important, you've got the diversity of resource mix. Because when the big one hits, you're not going to be able to move the energy from a solar farm because you're not going to have the inertia to move it. Whereas a net metering application may have the opportunity to power that particular residence because it's on-site consumption. So as we're moving forward, what is sort of the thinking? Is it a feed-in tariff 600 megawatt goal, or is it a distributive generation goal of 600 megawatts for the city?
It is absolutely a distributed generation goal, and that's why there's 3 programs that we've communicated since 2010 in our integrated resource plan. One component is a net metered goal. Some of that will be incented, some of it will be non-incented, but we have about a little over 300 megawatts in our integrated resource plan. And if we adjust our thinking on the 5%, it could be something different. We'll look into that. We also have the feed-in tariff goal, which is 150, and it could go up to 600 megawatts. That's what we're contemplating in the integrated resource plan. And then we have a community solar goal, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is trying to get properties on city development on city properties and then allowing the community to participate in that and get a net meter type benefit through a bill credit. In sum total, we're talking about in a neighborhood of 800 to 1,000 megawatts of local solar.
So I guess we'll wait to that. We'll table that piece for a second. But coming back to the feed-in tariff, so you had have a 10 megawatt sort of pilot program that came out in 2012. You've got another 65 megawatts that are sort of in some form of the application process. That's the first, I'll call it grouping, because I know that you're using the word tranche for something else. That's the first grouping, and that's priced the way it is: 17 cents, 16 cents, 15 cents, 14 cents, 13 cents a kilowatt hour, that going out potentially in January. And you've got a 31% fallout sort of rate, I guess, sort of in that first grouping system-wide. The Remap, to address something that was sort of spoken to earlier, I agree with you. We're not Edison territory, but we're also not Hawaii and some of the other sort of, I think, comparisons that we've got. So why not tune that Remap device for a little bit to sort of see, put it out as an offering, and if it doesn't work and if it falls within, I forget what the ratio was, the 20% or whatever it is, you dial it up or you dial it down. Why not sort of employ that sort of strategy now as opposed to waiting for the next grouping of the 400 megawatts that's being talked about?
So you're suggesting to use that for the 5th tranche?
Well, I mean, why wait and not do it now? I mean, is there a policy reason why that we wouldn't want to sort of dial the number down to, or rather, tune the number in a way that better reflects sort of what the market is?
There's no technical reason why we could not. However, when we were developing this program and the program was approved, it was very, very important to the development community to have a known program so that they could see that there'd be 100 megawatts and what the rules were. And so to be consistent with what we had said when we launched the program, that we would have a 100 megawatt program and here's the price points, I think that's an important part of stabilizing the market so that they know what to expect. Quite frankly, we believe that the market is already starting to look at projects at the 13 cents to say, can we make that work or not? They're not waiting for it to be launched before they start asking those questions and start developing projects because they want to be ready to go to get them into day one. So we think that from a market perspective, having a very clear and known quantity is important. With that said, there's no technical reason why we couldn't make changes.
But aren't we there now? We've got a 2012 sort of record built. We've got how much has been sort of, I forget what the term was, not contracted, but you've got a universe that's been out, that's been offered. How much has sort of been offered through the 4th tranche?
I believe that number was 60-some megawatts. And that is currently active.
And that's active in terms of sort of signed deals, not just paper, but actually up and running. It's about 4.7 megawatts.
That projects that are up and running,
yeah.
2.7 megawatts.
2.7
that
megawatts.
We have today. 5 megawatts we expect by the end of the year.
What do you think is sort of taken so long? Because the program in its pilot starts in 2012. We're coming on the end of 2014, and we've got 2.7 megawatts up and running out of a 75 megawatt sort of offering.
Okay, I think there's several reasons. One is that the interconnection takes some time. There's a lot of engineering that goes into it and a lot of communication back and forth with the customers. I think that the customers are finding challenges getting those rooftops secured and making sure that they can get those agreements done. And quite frankly, there is a motivation of customers, and they have a window of when they have to get a project done. So I could get a project done today and pay X price. But if I knew I had 18 months to get a project done, I might look and say, do I think that solar panels are going to be a little bit cheaper 6 months from now? And so there's a little bit of that in this whole equation as well, where they're looking at it and going, when is the right time to actually pull the trigger on my contract on solar panels, and can I do better if I wait? All of those factors play in together is why we're using up, I believe, all of the time that was allocated to them to get these projects done. But they are going to hit the deadlines, otherwise they're going to fall out and not have a project at all.
And so when that happens, what happens? So do folks sort of come back in? They don't come back in at the 16-cent sort of tranche or 15-cent. It's just additional capacity that we'll have to decide from a policy perspective what to do with.
Right. So if those projects fall out, we go to the waiting list. Maybe they come in. They can reapply in the future. But if all the megawatts are not actually secured by the end of the program, then it's a policy decision. Well, what do you do? Do you take those megawatts and put them in a new program? Do you not do that? We're under no obligation to do anything particular with those megawatts that do not get ultimately fulfilled.
Yeah.
Don't they go to the next tranche?
The megawatts do not go to the next tranche. So if the first tranche was 20 megawatts and only 10 ultimately were successful, you wouldn't take 10 and put it on the second tranche. You wouldn't know that until the whole program was allocated.
And then presumably there's a decision to be made with sort of the unspent capacity.
Exactly.
Right. And so
down the road.
So understanding that that's sort of the thinking for the first 100, there's talk about 450 watts now, megawatts sort of next. What does that sort of look like? I guess that's where the introduction of the Remap sort of mechanism comes into play?
That's exactly right. And we've said that it needs to fit our system. We need to do it at the right time. We need to make sure that we have the staff available to actually implement the program. That's absolutely critical. We can't implement more program without staff. And we need to make sure that the timing is right when we launch an expanded program, and that we can take the best lessons that we've learned from the prior programs and apply it to a future program.
Sure. Well, it's all very exciting and interesting stuff. I will say, though, that I am concerned about just having a fit lens on our distributive generation sort of program, because, you know, the next conversation, and I know the board hasn't acted, is they're looking at 450 megawatts of fit. That doesn't sound like 450 megawatts of distributed generation. And understanding that net metering is, you know, we're woefully behind the rest of the state, and maybe strategically, unless I'm unaware of a reason, that doesn't seem to make an awful lot of sense, especially if the folks that can benefit are the folks that Mr. Koretz mentioned a second ago in CD8 who could benefit from, as ratepayers, as folks who sort of work with all of this stuff. And then the part that excites me here potentially is looking at PACE and HERO and figuring out a financing mechanism for our folks to have more in-basin distributive generation applications that benefit ratepayers and can be financed by the utility, thereby satisfying what I think ultimately you all are probably very concerned with, which is getting that renewable energy credit. And now understanding that net metering doesn't allow for that today, talks at CEC, but I just wonder out loud what the $8 million more that we're paying for the FIT program, because we paid $24 million thereabouts for feed and tariff. $16 million is what we normally would have paid for the same units of energy. How much renewable energy credits I could have bought for $8 million? I mean, so that kind of math and analysis, I think, is going to be really important ultimately for the ratepayer to understand, are we doing the best by them given the tremendous mandate that we have, which is absolutely crucial and necessary, which is to have a more diverse fuel source, namely distributed generation solar. So I think it's incredibly exciting, and I can't wait to hear the next round to see what that looks like. Unless there's any questions here, we should probably move on to 2 and 3, because there'll be some bleed over here. Bob, you had a comment?
No, let's move on.
Okay. All right.
It's all the same discussion.
2 and 3, Mr. Prieto. 2 and 3.
It only gets
sir.
better.
It only gets better. 2 and 3 relate to, number 2 relates to motion Corian, Blumenfield, Buscaino, Fuentes, and Farrell relative to requesting the department to report in regard to integrating the energy.
My apologies. We can't move on from item 1 without hearing the only card on that. Adam Lane, please, from the Los Angeles Business Council. Sure, come on up. You can go ahead and speak first, and then we'll take your card afterwards. Mr. Lane?
Good afternoon, Councilman. My name is Adam Lane on behalf of the LA Business Council and the Clean LA Coalition. I would like to express my satisfaction with the progress of the Feed-in Tariff program and the hard work of the LA DWP in continually improving the effectiveness and reliability of FIT. We are committed to reaching a goal of 1,200 megawatts of local solar developed in LA, and we believe that an expanded Feed-in Tariff program and a robust net metering program together are critical components to reach this goal. We're encouraged by DWP's reporting of 5 megawatts of the FIT 100 to be interconnected by the end of this year, 58 of active projects, and 118 on the FIT waitlist. 75% of currently installed projects are applicant-owned, 43%, or 120 megawatts, received are applicant-owned properties. The program will be oversubscribed going into the fifth tranche of next year. According to the UCLA Solar Atlas, there's an estimated more than 5 gigawatts of rooftop capable of undertaking solar projects. LABC is very thrilled to announce the release of a database of prospective FIT projects, which Councilmember Koretz mentioned, to be available on the LABC Institute website that will be a benefit to all solar stakeholders. The database provided by the UCLA Luskin Center lists over 7,000 available properties within the city of LA that have not yet participated in the FIT 100 program. We have also been working with several council members on ways to encourage smaller projects to be undertaken. We support and appreciate LADWP's relentless work to expand the program, providing the city of LA with a clean, renewable energy source. LA City is on the right path and must continue to be a nationwide leader in rooftop solar. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind making room, this will move things along a little bit faster. If we can get Michelle Kinman, Steve Coulter, and Gina Goodhill-Rosen, please.
Good afternoon. Michelle Kinman with Environment California, statewide environmental organization headquartered here in LA. I wanted to mention that Environment California is part of the LA Clean Energy Coalition, which supports actually a big goal for DG, as you've put forth, Councilmember Fuentes. We're supporting a goal for 1,200 megawatts of local solar in Los Angeles. That's about 20% of DWP's summertime peak energy load, and it also represents DWP's fair share of a larger goal that Governor Brown's put forth for 12,000 megawatts of local clean power across the state. And if we're going to hit that goal, we think very strongly that we need to expand the feed-in tariff to the 600 megawatts and also put forth a really expanded, robust net metering program. And I'm a little bit concerned about where the conversation looks like it's headed with pitting sort of the feed-in tariff and net metering against one another as competitors, because I really think we need both policies on the ground. They both drive different markets that are very important to Los Angeles. And so I hope going forward we can look at how to develop out both of these programs in really smart ways. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you. And I'm Steve Coulter, the Policy Director with the Los Angeles Business Council, and also here on behalf of the LA Clean Energy Coalition. And would like to, say again what, Michelle really expressed was that we support as part of a 1,200 megawatt goal in Los Angeles of local solar, both a robust net energy metering program and an expanded feed-in tariff program as critical components to reaching that goal. Since the ratepayer advocate made some comments today and also made a similar set of comments on August 5th DWP board meeting, wanted to just let you know and highlight today that UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation has prepared an analysis based on those first 4 tranches of the FIT 100 in response to the ratepayer advocate's concerns in order to help address those. And we'll be providing that letter both to the DWP Board of Commissioners, which the letter was addressed for, and also we'll provide that to this committee as well, because I think that would be very helpful. And just to highlight a couple of the unique benefits that UCLA identifies in that analysis for the FIT, when looking at local in-basin solar installations as opposed to out-of-basin solar, there's a number of benefits that are not realized by out-of-basin but are by local solar, and that's distributed generation can enhance grid stability, resiliency, such as what Koretz and Councilmember Blumenfield's both spoke to. As well as avoiding the need for new long-distance transmission investment. And then, of course, the greater opportunities for local job creation and additional environmental benefits, including a reduced heat island effect within the city. The FIT 100 program has been very successful and encouraging investment and job. Oh, I'm near my time. I just also wanted to say there was a couple questions about the economic development potential, and LABC is actually working with USC currently on
Thank you. We're going to have to move on to the next speaker.
Okay, great.
Yeah, you can file your comments with us.
Excellent,
Great.
excellent.
Just to be fair.
Hi, Gina Goodhill-Rosen with Global Green USA. We're also members of the Los Angeles Clean Energy Coalition. And both of the last two speakers really covered a lot of what I was going to say. But very briefly, Global Green has been advocating for years for 1,200 megawatts of local solar because of the fossil fuel reductions that it can create, the greenhouse gas emissions that it can reduce, the local jobs, and the leadership role that it can provide for Los Angeles. And that's the part that I wanted to touch on. Dr. Pickle, I think, opened his presentation with an interesting point, which was really reminding us the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that Los Angeles makes up in total compared to the rest of the world. And it's not a huge amount. And he noted that what we do really is important more on a symbolic level than anything else. And I think some of the measures we're talking about, like a 600 megawatt FIT, that to me is what's most compelling about it. Yes, it creates jobs. Yes, it really gets us to our goals in Los Angeles, but it sends a message internationally that if Los Angeles, like the car capital of the world, can do this, anyone can do this. And I think that's really something that we should keep in mind, because Los Angeles does capture the world's attention in a way that no one else does. And then finally, just to echo the points that were made before, throughout this presentation, I did feel a little bit like it was sort of pitting net metering against the feed-in tariff. And once again, they do hit two different markets. I think both of them on an expanded level is really what would be best for the city of Los Angeles. Thanks.
Sarah
Waters.
Sarah
Waters. I work for Absolutely Solar, which is one of the local contractors that is involved in the FIT 50, and I also do development on the FIT 100 side, as well as net metering. So thanks for my colleagues who are advocates here. I agree with everything they're saying, but I can also speak to the specifics with regard to the marketplace. And there are some confusions that are being revealed by some of the questions that you're asking the staff and Mr. Pickle. I do want to say that net metering, I have the experience of having done net metering development in both PG&E, LADWP, as well as Southern California Edison. And I'm here to tell you the reason why your net metering is not working is because you need a couple of different things. You need rate structure reform. What was not on Fred Pickle's presentation is that at the top of the scale, net metering is paying customers about 54 cents a kilowatt hour. That's a lot higher than anything that's ever been paid in the LADWP area. So you have to be aware that when retail rates are being credited for net metering systems, the business model is extraordinarily strong. And that's why you have a very high adoption of net metering in PG&E. Not so much as in Southern California Edison, their rates were not as good as PG&E. So if you want a strong net metering system here, you've got to offer those rates. There's no way around it. So that's my first point. The other point is that we do not have an ability in the LADWP service territory to offer power purchase agreements to individual customers. And that's because our city charter does not allow it. So that's something that you need to know about and consider. We can offer leases here, but there are problems with those as well, because a lease is typically shorter than a PPA. And so the net out for a net metering customer is still underwater. They'll be paying more for the lease than they would for their power. Okay, so those 2 points.
Thank you very much. Very good. That's all the cards that we have on item number 1. Let's move on to items 2 and 3, Mr. Prieto.
Yes, sir. Item number 2, motion Krikorian, Blumenfield, Buscano, Fuentes, and O'Farrell, relative to request in the Department to report in regard to integrating the energy from feed-in tariff projects into the power distribution system and related matters. And the third item relates to also report in response to motion Fuentes Krikorian relative to the solar incentive program and the feasibility of developing a more robust net metering program.
And Mr. Prieto, my apologies. For item number 1, I'd like to continue the matter in committee. Request that the department, in conjunction with the CAO and CLA, report back on the following: a potential program alternatives for implementing 450 megawatts of distributed solar that includes a mix of solar programs such as net metering, the local economic development impacts of the FIT program, including the number of local jobs created by the program to date, and the feasibility of prioritizing Los Angeles and California-based business in the FIT program. and we'll continue the item and ask them to come back with those informations. Very good. Item 2.
Okay, item 2 and 3 together. Item 2, as we read the motion, it very much looks like a net meter type program. Is how could you take a contract under feed-in tariff, but instead of connect directly to DWP, connect it back through the meter of the customer so they get net meter benefits, but still have a contractual relationship. Item number 3 was about looking at an expanded net meter program, where maybe what we could do is allow entities that have large rooftops, low load, but to build a large project so they get the net meter benefit, and then the excess can flow to DWP, which we would pay for. So we are supportive of that. And when we talk about an expanded feed-in tariff program, this is certainly one of the elements that we'd be very interested in talking about. There is one very, very, very important element, though, is that the CEC has said that anything that's connected behind the meter is what's called a bucket 3. It's a portfolio category 3. There's a limit to how much we can use to count towards our RPS. Only 10% is allowed to be counted. Additionally, it is not very valuable, whereas a portfolio content category 1 or bucket 1 might be worth $30. A bucket 3 may be worth $2 to $3. That has to be solved because any of our programs, doesn't matter if it's local solar, utility scale solar, we absolutely have to figure out a way to comply with the RPS. So we have to make sure everything counts. So we're not just letting it sit there. We are trying to do something about it. We are in communication directly through the CEC. We're also working with industry groups such as SCAPA and CMUA to advocate that these customers are connected to our grid in our service territory. We see no reason why this should count as bucket 3. If we read state law, it looks to us like it should be bucket 1, and we've been advocating for that. We've also been in contact with the IOUs to say, doesn't this make sense for you too? Now, the IOUs are controlled by the PUC, so they would have to adjust their rulemaking. So there's a potential that there could be a joint rulemaking of the CEC and the PUC that would allow for net meter customers to get bucket 1 credit. If that happens, then it makes a lot of sense to fully look at, can we pay customers for any energy they develop and send to us and pay them at some sort of new rate? And this is what Dr. Pickle was referring to, is could the rate structure be such that it's aligned to incentivize that type of behavior? And that would certainly count for any sort of local solar development, okay? So that's very, very important. We want to make sure that if we do a rate like that, that it's, it's equivalent to other rates and structures. And we understand why our net metered solar program has been slower. We've always known why it's so slower. The reason is that LADWP rates are lower than anyone else's around. It's harder to make the economics work, and we're actually proud of that. We want to keep them low, but the industry is starting to catch up. So we're glad that the IOUs have great advancement in net meter programs because it's driven the cost down, and now it's happening in our service territory, and it is becoming much more cost effective. We're going to see that grow. So we will look at, in our IRP, advancing net meter programs. We will consider whether it can be part of a feed-in tariff program if we get the bucket 1 status. But we will also look at, can we just continue to facilitate customers, even if they don't get paid for the extra generation and it becomes a full credit, just to allow the program to continue so it is consistent with how the state defines the net meter program. And as long as our rates don't pass costs on to other customers, we see no reason why we cannot pursue that.
And in we had a previous conversation about the rate restructuring, and there was some conversation that you're looking at sort of 4 potential sort of tiers. Are you beginning to do the analysis to try to figure out how to shoehorn the net metering into that?
We are looking at that. That's all part of the discussion and what our tier approach should be, and we have to also recognize that the world is very much changing, is that in today's and yesterday's world, you might say, well, peak hours are always more valuable. Well, that may not be true in the future when you have a high supply of renewable energy and we actually start to depress peak hour pricing to something that might be negative. So when we think about tiers, we need to think about a future that has much more variable renewables on the grid and what that actually does to real-time pricing. So this is something we need to be cognitive
and on
of.
the bucket 1, bucket 3 conversation, having been the Utilities and Commerce Committee chair during the first couple of attempts, and then we finally were able to get the Cimidium bill through, and I wasn't chair at the time, but I recall vividly sort of the reasons why we did 1, 2, and 3 buckets. It seems to me that we wouldn't need legislation to sort of have that interpretation at the CEC. The CEC has the capability of doing that. Is that your sort of
We concur. We think the legislation's pretty darn clear that it would allow it.
And so I guess it's just to say that, the sooner that we figure out how and what the strategy is to lobby the Energy Commission. I've met with a couple of commissioners, and it seems to me that they also see it that way. I guess it's just a matter of formalizing our position and maybe getting a group of folks, as you mentioned, the IOUs and CMUA and others, to chime in. I mean, I think, that needs to happen very, very quickly.
And it's happening now.
Okay. Very good.
And I did want to follow up because you did mention about local solar, and that is our goal. It's not feed-in tariff, it's local solar, whether it's a feed-in tariff program that we have now or through some sort of expanded net metered program, that's fine. But we also have a community solar. And what we're trying to do is develop something that in the community that on city properties we can build a project and allow customers that don't have a rooftop, they live in a townhouse, they live in an apartment, they can participate in that, and so they can help fund that and they get that bill credit. But it also has some of the features that were discussed earlier today, is that it gives us the ability to potentially provide low-income benefit. So if a low-income customer gets an $8 a month benefit today, wouldn't it make sense to take that $8 benefit and turn it into a kilowatt-hour benefit, so as rates go up in the future, they're hedging against future rate increases. So we think that there's some benefit there.
And so with those 2 projects that we're doing in my district, the water tower, DWP, and the other yard there off the 5 freeway, that would be community solar.
Yes, we hope to be able to turn that into a community solar program. And again, hiring local people, getting them into training programs so that they can get into well-paying jobs of the future. And that's one of the fundamentals that we're talking about in trying to design that program. And that concludes my remarks on items 2 and 3.
Very good. Colleagues?
Question on the community solar. Is there a way to use the HERO program and community solar together so that folks who don't have the rooftop could invest basically through their billing system?
So is the HERO similar to the PACE program?
It's exactly.
Okay, I'm familiar with that, and we'd have to think that through a bit, recognizing that the PACE was designed to be part of the structure in which they're participating in, so as they leave, it's still being paid on that structure,
right,
where ours is on a different facility. We'd have to think it through. I haven't thought about it, but we can certainly do that.
The lien, I mean, that was the whole problem, and I was actually the author of that bill back in the legislature to expand that to water and to expand the solar on it. But you don't have anything to put a lien against. But it seems like a good idea if there's a way to run it with the bill so that folks can make that investment. Now, it might be an investment on their bill where it's sort of an on-bill investment, and maybe if you do it at a smaller scale, you don't need to have the lien, where you would, in essence, agree to an increase for a certain period of time, and then that could hold you would buy into a certain price on energy that you could take advantage of at any income scale.
Well, we will look into that and see if it makes sense for a program such as this.
Right.
Mr. Kress?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's clear I'm a strong supporter of net metering. I think we need to do more. We need to do it more quickly. Climate change is just becoming worse and worse, and I think we need to address it aggressively. And I'm concerned about the talk about unbundling the electric residential rate, which is sort of the policy thinking of groups like ALEC, which is the industry group funded by the Koch brothers to try and gut solar power across the country. What the June 17th memo says to me is that DWP wants to significantly cut the compensation to rooftop solar customers. And I think that would dramatically cut the participation rate. And I really don't want to see that happen. I think looking at the question of whether other customers are subsidizing rooftop solar, I think is a little misplaced, because in some ways those who are non-net metered customers are being subsidized by those doing the net metering, because those folks are helping to provide clean greenhouse gas emission-free energy to the grid. They're providing cleaner energy overall. They're reducing congestion on the power grid, and they're reducing the need for peaker plants. So they're actually providing something to those who don't have it. And so if there was a modest subsidy in recognition of that, I don't think that would necessarily be such a terrible thing. But I think cutting back on what we contribute to the folks that are putting in rooftop solar, I think is a mistake and will reduce the participation pretty significantly. Also, why are we talking about planning to halt our net metering at around 300 megawatts? That seems like an arbitrary cap, and we certainly could do more.
That is 5% under the old calculation methodology that we used, because that's what was being used for the IOUs, is a 5% cap. But they've revised their methodology. We're going to go back and take a look at that for the 2014 Integrated Resource Plan. And it might be, I think Dr. Pickle pointed out, it could be just non-coincident. It could be 600 megawatts.
623.
And maybe it should be. Also, I understand the state legislature changed the methodology for other utilities to set their net metering targets, and that the outcome required more rooftop solar. What would the impact be if we adopted that same methodology?
So what requirements were changed? I don't...
I understand the state legislature changed their methodology for the other utilities to set targets, and we were exempted from that.
So are we talking about how you calculate the 5%?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So that's what we'll look at, because we did some research and we did find that they've changed this non-coincident peak, and we'll see how that applies to DWP and whether, because the intention was just to follow what the state is doing when we set those targets in the overall 2014 or the 2013 IRP. We just wanted to match what the state was doing. So if it changes, we can change that in 2014. We can have new numbers if that makes sense to do that.
So we'll take a look at that.
We are taking a look at it now.
Very good. Thank you.
And so, just to put a finer point on what Mr. Koretz was asking, so, there was, it looks like there was a drop in the SIP program. What do you attribute the drop to? Because I think here it says that $15 million was paid out compared to the $38 million that was paid out the year before. And at the same time, it seems like there was also sort of a real ramp up on the feed-in tariff. So what is it? Why is it that we paid less of an incentive from one year to the next? I mean, the difference is about 30.
Yeah, Jason, I'll let you weigh in here and correct some of my statements. But we have a pretty consistent payment strategy that is about $40 million every single year that gets paid out, half to residential and half to commercial customers. If there is a one-year delay, some of it was that the projects were not getting processed as quickly as they needed to be so that they could hit that target, but we make it up in the next year. So the money doesn't disappear. The full allocation, the full $280+ million will be provided to customers over the course of time. So it's really the time between the customers getting the solar installed, when they make the application and are making the payments. And sometimes it doesn't come out perfectly on June 30th that we've closed out our fiscal year and paid all the $20 million. So, Jason, if I misstated that, you can correct it.
No, you got it correct. There's two factors. One is the variability. So if there's a fewer commercial projects that request incentives that year, you might drop a few $1 million. But the biggest factor was simply the rate of processing. And we were very slow to pay, and you'll actually see a graph on that in a few moments. We were very slow to pay out incentives earlier this year.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Yeah, on the SIP program, it ends in 2016, right? What do you expect to happen at that point in terms of what will be the impacts of that? And people connecting to the grid, et cetera.
Well, there'll be some carryover, so people still have time to build their projects. So we know that projects will continue to be installed in 2017 and possibly a little bit into 2018 because they do have a time period to do that. And so there was one other added item I wanted to mention is that also when we see the incentive rates drop, we dropped their incentive rates from 75 cents to 40 cents. That also had an impact on the marketplace because they get a little bit less incentive. So that was a momentary dip. I'm telling you now, the incentives probably don't matter because our system is seeing more and more and more applications every single week, and we'll show that to you when we get to item number 4.
Very good. Any additional questions, colleagues? All right, let's go ahead and take some speaker cards. We'll take them all together, items 2 and 3. If you would make room there, gentlemen, that would be appreciated. Michael Kaddish, Steve Coulter, Evan Gillespie. Looks like we've got 3 chairs there. Yeah, we'll do it. Please begin.
Sure. My name is Michael Kaddish. I'm the Executive Director of Grid Alternatives Greater Los Angeles. We are the administrator of the Single Family Affordable Solar Housing Program. And right now we work only in the investor-owned utilities. So we're in SoCal Edison territory. We would love to be doing what we do in the city of LA and to work with the council and LA DWP. We serve exclusively low-income families, reducing their bills by up to 80 to 100%. And we use volunteers mainly who are job trainees from some of the organizations that Councilman Koretz mentioned, people from Homeboy Industries, LA Trade Tech. They come to Grid Alternatives to get that experience and then go on to get jobs. They get real rooftop experience with us. We would love to have a program within LADWP, with the city, to benefit your constituents so that our trainees could actually perform in their own, this work to benefit their own communities and not have to go to Compton and Long Beach to learn skills to provide themselves with a livelihood. So that's all.
Great, thank you.
I'm Steve Coulter, again with the Los Angeles Business Council, and I had made some comments on the first motion and was going to speak on the second item, but I'll just take this time to kind of go off exactly what you were talking about with the kind of the economic development, workforce training opportunities with these programs, and kind of finish what I wasn't able to say the last time around. That we're actually. That we did a previous report with the LABC Institute and UCLA and USC looking at, which kind of made some recommendations about the workforce training opportunities and looked at the progress that those first 2 tranches have made as far as leading to projects, FIT projects within these solar equity hotspots. 40% of them were. And actually we're currently updating that analysis with USC right now to see how we've been doing over all 4 tranches altogether and trying to hone in on some more specific recommendations for how do we follow through about connecting these opportunities with workforce training programs to benefit workers. So just wanted to finish that thought. Thank you.
Great. Hi, Evan Gillespie with the Sierra Club. Wanted to say a couple quick things. First off, I want to just thank the chair for structuring the day in the way that he has and bringing together all the energy motions or the solar motions in one day. For overworked advocates, this is an extremely effective way to spend an afternoon, so thanks for that. I agree with a lot of what my colleagues on the previous motion said around the need for a complementary feed-in tariff and net metering program to provide different benefits to the grid. Different customers like different ones, so the conversation, I think, really should focus on how do we build a balance between the two. A couple other things on net metering here. So one of my roles in the Sierra Club is to advise our advocates at the state level on net metering and rooftop solar policy. And this conversation about the future of net metering is happening in more than a dozen states right now. And one of the cool distinctions about LA versus other utilities is that we're talking about how to grow these programs rather than slow them down. So I think we're heading in the right direction. One of the other unique things here is that one of the effective things that other utilities have done in thinking about the future of net metering is to do a cost-benefit analysis. It's something that the June 17th memo put forward. We think that's a great idea. I do think that the memo and the utility potentially makes the assumption here that there is a cost shift and that there's some sort of cross-subsidy between non-participants and participants. And we found in other states really surprising results where in Mississippi and Nevada, net metering programs have provided huge benefits to the grid and to other customers. And other places, the cost-benefit analysis has kind of worked out the same. So we don't know what it looks like in Los Angeles, and so we would encourage the utility and the City Council to move forward and develop that cost-benefit analysis while making sure that we have a clear process for other stakeholders to engage and provide comments. Two other quick things. The equity conversation is really important, and we need to be more intentional about how we design programs to make sure that they get into places like South LA. So the MASH and SASH programs that the investor-owned utilities run are a great example of what we could do. So we could support organizations like Grid Alternatives. The community solar program is another interesting example. So we would support both of those and would encourage the utility and this committee to think about how to move those forward.
Great, thank you very much. William Ernst Chenowek, Dan Chick, and Michelle Kinman, please. And our last speaker will be Jonathan Port.
Okay, I guess I'm here to rain on the parade. It seems like 13 cents a kilowatt hour is the magic number to keep the bulldozer away, because when you do the crude calculations and you take away all the tax things and tax credits and everything, you still have to pay property tax, insurance, and maintenance. And at the utilization levels that this stuff is, that comes out to about 13 cents a kilowatt hour. The problem is natural gas-fired combined cycles, bus bars, about 7 cents a kilowatt hour into the foreseeable future. And so this translates for the 1,200 megawatts people are talking about into $2 billion out of the ratepayer's pocket over the next 20 years.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members. Dan Shaw with Solar City. I'm also here on behalf of the Alliance for Safe Choice. The Alliance is an advocacy organization representing members who install rooftop solar systems, the majority of which those members install the majority of those solar systems across the nation. And the Alliance was primarily formed as an advocacy organization around net metering, promoting sensible and appropriate net metering policies across the country. Obviously, it goes without saying we support the continuation of a more robust net metering program here in DWP. We too believe it's a complementary policy to larger scale procurement type programs like a feed-in tariff or a RAM. And the distinction that you should sort of keep in mind is that, like others have said, it's an apples and oranges type of program. Net metering, of course, is just an accounting mechanism that incentivizes customers to reduce their own load. And of course, any excess generation, which is a small percentage of total generation, is credited by the utility, and those benefits, of course, need to be accounted for. And like Evan Gillespie said, we recommend a comprehensive and independent analysis and accounting of the full costs and benefits of net metering before any changes are considered. And we encourage the Council and DWP to undertake that analysis in partnership. Net metering, those exports may not be able to be, DWP may not be able to rely on those exports for RPS credit, for example. So distinctions need to be made. And finally, we absolutely support the need to reclassify buckets 1 and 1 versus 3, working in cooperation with CMUA and others at the CEC and the PUC.
Thank you very much.
Michelle Kinman with Environment California.
If we can have Jonathan Port come up too while you're speaking, Michelle, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
As I said earlier, we are fully supportive of expanding net metering, and I had just 3 quick recommendations that have largely been articulated by some of the other panelists, so I'll be brief. The first is that DWP update its net metering cap to be consistent with the precedent set by the CPUC and the legislature, and I'm really encouraged to hear from staff that that's something they're considering for the next IRP. My second recommendation falls in line with what Michael Kadish had said earlier from Grid Alternatives about thinking about additional workforce development training programs for solar that Grid Alternatives or others might be able to roll out for the city. And then third being to conduct a really full study of the costs and benefits of net metering, and that before future changes be made to the net metering program, that DWP create a work group that would have a variety of stakeholders at it, including business, the environmental, and the environmental justice community, to look at the costs and benefits of net metering. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Port. I'm founder and CEO of Perma City Solar. I'd like to thank the council. We have a great council and the DWP. This discussion that I'm having is in support of net metering. I've been doing this for about 13 years, and we have the privilege of building the largest solar roof in the history of Los Angeles. It's 5.1 megawatts. It's a combination of SIP and FIT. And I'm looking at the load profile. We just brought them online, and I've seen that it actually successfully cut demand through the whole afternoon, which is not what people think of solar. So we're looking at these very amazing load profiles, and I'd like to encourage the council and this committee to give really good leadership to DWP to break down the boundaries that are limiting solar. There's 45 billion watts of solar being made. This project, although large, it's one out of every 10,000 watts went to this project. But we think we can do more, and I know that Councilman Koretz has very good, strong leadership. I know that Councilman Fuentes does. We need to break down the barriers and just get this moving for the city. It's going to reshape our city in ways that we can't even see right now and lead to an amazing future. I know from my challenges in 13 years and recent that it's really hard work for all the solar companies. It's really hard work for DWP. But we need to all work together just to break those barriers down and roll up our sleeves and get it done and make the city work. And that's just my message. I'm looking at some really amazing things coming out of solar.
Great, thank you very much. Colleagues, what we'll do is we'll continue the matter in committee and request the Department of Water and Power, in conjunction with the City Administrative Officer and the Chief Legislative Analyst's Office, to report back on the following: the feasibility of adjusting the FIT program to allow a net metering component whereby the first point of energy consumption occurs on the project site, and reconciling the SIP net metering 310 megawatt limit given the state's latest definition and clarification of peak load capacity. That will be the order. Item 4.
Item 4, sir, the last item on the agenda. DWP report in response to motion Koretz Englander relative to the department's reporting in regard to the SIP approval process and methods to reduce excessive delays.
So I'm going to go ahead and give this update real quick. In short, we've talked about this. We've got about 112 megawatts online for solar incentive program participants. We've talked about SIP and net energy metering interchangeably, and I'll refer to it as SIP here. That's split evenly among residential and commercial. We expect to see this at about 280 megawatts by the end of 2016. What that means for the number of systems in place is, while we have 13,000 in now, we expect to see well over 40,000 in by the end of 2016. One of the major challenges that we've had this year is processing times. From the green light that we give customers, meaning we've reserved money for them, to the inspection time and to the payment time. So while we were at upwards of 20 weeks to pay a customer for an incentive, sometimes up into the 30-week and 40-week range earlier this year, we've brought that down pretty dramatically. The confirmation time, which is the time that we take to review a request for money, we've brought that down from around 10 weeks earlier this year to between 1 and 4 weeks over the last month and a half. While we've made some pretty good progress there, and a little bit later I'll tell you how we've made that progress, we've actually taken a little bit, our inspection time, while we were at about 2 weeks on average earlier this year, which was great, and that's actually our goal, we've actually increased that recently to about 6 to 8 weeks. And I'll go into a little bit more details as to why in a quick moment. So just a brief snapshot of the history of participation. And really all you're seeing here is the week-by-week number of applications that customers have been submitting. And so there's two key takeaways here. One is there's a little bit of cyclicality, or seasonality rather. So you see in the winter months, as to be expected, less people are applying. But what you really see, which is important, is over the last 4 months, we've seen a sustained higher level of participation. Our all-time week participation rate of, I think, well over 250 was about 5 or 6 weeks ago. And over the last few weeks, we've seen well over 150. Now, on average, we've seen about 75 per week, so we've seen well above that. And what that means for customers is it's actually challenging, as you well know, for us to ramp quickly. So we need to be well above our goals so that when we have influx like this, we can actually respond quickly, and the impact to customers, the wait time to customers, doesn't creep back up to 10 weeks. It actually stays pretty close to our goals. And I want to talk about the historical wait times right now. And this, again, is week by week. And I'll break this down really simply for you, meaning earlier this year, this is the beginning of the year, the lower level here, the blue, is the time it takes us to give the customer a green light that we've saved money for them that they can go ahead and build their system. The next layer is the yellow, which is the time it takes the customer to build their system. Sometimes they've already built and they just submit their request to get interconnected. Sometimes they wait to get that green light and then they build. So there's a lot of variability here and we're not in control of that variability. The little green sliver you see here that's expanding lately is the time that it takes a customer to get interconnected, meaning they've built, they want us to go inspect and turn the system on, and that's how long it takes us to do it. The red is how long it takes us to pay customers. On the customer side, that's a little less of a concern for them because very often they assign that payment to a third party, whether it's the developer or another entity, and they can actually afford to float that a little bit longer, so customers often don't feel that. Some customers do because some customers expect it, but at the end of the day, the biggest piece for a customer is this confirmation time and the green time to get inspected. And the big takeaway here is that, one, we've made progress. We've made significant progress on the payment and confirmation time. And two, we made a pretty substantial change a few weeks ago, which was to take our inspection staff from a focused group out in the valley that handled inspections all over the city, whether it was on the east side, the west side, or down in Wilmington. They covered the entire city. And we took all of those inspectors, which also set the meter, the same person sets the meter that inspects and energizes the system. We took them and integrated them into our districts. And what that does is it gives us better geographical coverage, but it also gives us the opportunity to cross-train other meter setters to be able to turn solar on and energize solar. So it gives us additional flexibility with staff as well. Now, what that means is we actually had to bring them out into the districts and physically move them. And at the same time we did that, we saw that record application submission. So both of those in combination have really put us in a temporary delayed state where we're looking at about 6 to 8 weeks for inspections. But we do expect that to come down. Over the last 3 weeks after that transition was made, we inspected 20 systems 3 weeks ago to 50 2 weeks ago, up to 100 last week, and we expect to see that grow to about 150 to 200. So we have been making progress, and we've been communicating that fairly regularly. Now, I want to touch on some of the few things that we did over the last number of months to improve the other parts of the program. The number one thing we did was implemented the lease attestation. This issue was brought up earlier. We have to review every single lease to make sure it does not replicate the resale of electricity, which is against our city charter. So what we did is we implemented a one-page document that allows our admin staff to just review that one sheet of paper that has the customer and their contractor attest that they're not reselling the electricity. So that has dramatically improved our ability to review applications. We've added processing staff, and to improve our long wait times on our call center, we've just recently added and trained 4 new customer service representatives, in addition to having 4 more on standby. When peaks occur, we have those folks ready to jump in and assist. I talked about restructuring the inspection group, and then finally, that restructured inspection group out in the districts, they've dedicated Monday, Tuesday, and Saturday to solar only. So they're setting meters and turning systems on only for solar. They're not doing other programs, whether it's a smart grid or new business. They've dedicated that to bring those wait times because the spike in solar is so high. So we're dedicated to bringing that down, and we expect to see some results in the coming weeks. Now, what we want to do long term, actually in the short term, we want to do expedited confirmations. I showed you that blue piece where it takes a number of weeks for us to give folks the green light. What we want to do is for those simple systems, simple residential system, smaller, there's no complicated features, we want to give them that green light automatically. And we feel like that really dovetails pretty well into what the Department of Building and Safety has done, which is launched their online permit application. So we believe that will actually reduce our processing times pretty substantially. and it'll be a big benefit to customers. We've also, again, improved our outreach. We see that a lot of the delay is caused by uncertainty as to whether or not they should be installing one device or the other. So we've developed a handout to give to customers and their contractors to say, you got a simple system, this is what it should look like, and if it doesn't, then you need to make a correction before we go out, before we actually try to energize the system, and that in concept would reduce the level of suspensions. We're also developing YouTube videos for installations and YouTube videos for the application process. Finally, what we want to do, and we've talked about this back in June, is completely separate the net metering from the incentive process. And this is something that, it's not a light switch where we just say, okay, that's how we change the process. It's actually updating our system, our workflow system, to support that. And we believe that that's something that we'll do early next year, within the first few months of 2015. So with that, I'd like to take questions.
Great, thank you. So there was a moment when there was, at least I got calls on language in these contracts that were preventing people from actually being able to sort of get through. And I think that you mentioned that so long as people attested that they weren't doing more with the power or selling it, is that was that the fix? Are we sort of moving along? There's no hang up there anymore with the administrative part of all of this?
That was the major administrative burden on our processing staff. So again, in short, we don't allow the resale of electricity. A lot of the power purchase agreements throughout the rest of the state and the rest of the country actually have power purchase agreements, which are not allowed in the city of Los Angeles. So they had to structure their lease in such a way that didn't replicate the resale of electricity. So we reviewed every single lease template and every single lease that was submitted. Alternatively, now we review that attestation that the customer is not reselling electricity, or the third-party developer is not reselling electricity. So instead of reviewing 30 pages, we're reviewing 1 page.
Got it. And today, if I installed solar on my roof, how long would it take me to receive the permission? Let's say I got it in by close of business today. How long would it take for me to receive the rebate?
2 steps. First step is you let us know that you want to install. And that will take about 1 to 4 weeks over the last few weeks, again, to get that green light to go ahead and construct. Once you have that and you construct, you put in the notice that you want to be inspected and have your system energized. Typically, again, over the course of the year, it was about 2 weeks, but over the last handful of weeks, it's been between 6 and 8 weeks. On average, it's about 5 to 7 weeks, but there are some customers that exceed the average, some that are a little bit below.
Got it. Very good. Mr. Kretz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, I initiated this because my constituents who are calling us with problems are not having an experience anything like what you've described. And if anything, parts of this sounds promising because it seems like you've addressed some of the hang-ups in the system. What terrifies me is all the problems existed during the period where we had very low demand. The fact that demand has shot up makes me very nervous. But let me give you a couple examples. The first one that put this on our radar screen, and we still average about a complaint a month about terrible, incredibly lengthy service. The first one was a guy named Sonny Fox, who used to be the head of Paramount Studios. And he decided he wanted to be an example for his grandchildren. And so he wiped out his tennis courts at his home and replaced it with solar panels. And did the construction, got approved in a week by city inspectors. This was in December. He had a big party where he showed his solar panels to his friends. And instead of being a solar champ, in February he was informed he needed a special meter of some kind, months later, and that it wouldn't be put in until July. So instead, with his friends, it became a running joke. It was about 8 months, and he was a solar chump instead of a solar champ. The most recent, one of the most recent vocal constituents of mine, Calla Weimer, had a bad time of it also. Her solar was installed in February, and despite frequent calls to us, her solar was not turned on by DWP until September. I mean, that includes pretty close to the current period, yet the problems aren't resolved. We're still getting this kind of problem. Every time you get someone that takes 7 or 8 months for DWP to get through their piece of the process, you have someone out there bad-mouthing their personal decision, saying, why the hell did I ever do this? This was a miserable experience. So how are people still having the occasional 7 or 8 months wait for specifically DWP to do its job? So, and how are we making sure that we have actually resolve this, not just put a Band-Aid on it?
Yeah, and we see all those complaints as well, and we respond to those complaints. When we do our investigations, what we're finding is that the number one reason that customers deviate from the averages is that there's something wrong with the process. And so what we have realized is that we need to do a better job of training our customers, and our customers need to hold their developers accountable to do things right. And that's why, Jason, on that slide we need to develop the fact sheets for our customers. We need to develop some YouTube videos to say if you do it this way and you do it correctly, it will really, really help speed up your systems. And we also, over the last 3 or 4 months, we've been looking at the problem developers. We know there's a handful of developers that are consistently not doing the process correctly, and it makes our customers extremely irritated. So we're going to bring the developers in and say, this is how you do it. We want to teach them to do it correctly, because if it's all done correctly, it moves much more smoothly. Now, we're not to our targets. We need to get to that 3-week target for the processing. We need to get to our inspection target. We'd like to see 5 days on our inspections, and we need to do a better job of cutting the checks. And we're working our way towards that process. But life will be much better if our customers are well trained and they hold their developers more accountable.
Now, I heard the idea of coming in and training the developers, but it was already a while ago, and it sounds like it still hasn't been done. So I would think that would be the highest priority. The other thing is a situation like the first one that I mentioned, where they needed a special meter. I assume that was probably a screw up by the developer, but you would hope we would let them know within a week that they were missing something, rather than 2 months later, oh, you need a special meter, and we can't install it for another 5 months. Or we can't approve it. How can we not get past that kind of element?
I don't know the circumstances of that particular customer, but if we go out for the inspection and we provide the information to the customer and they make the corrections right away, our team has done a very good job of getting back out to inspect the customers. So this might be an anomaly, and I'm not going to say that there are not anomalies out there. Some do fall through the cracks, but when we do the investigation, generally there is communication that is not usually followed up with, and it tends to be the customer is unaware, the developer has moved on to other things, they need to come back and fix the problems.
Would it ever happen that we would be in this situation where we would say, well, you need to do this, and we'll do our piece 5 months from now?
I don't know the circumstances, so I can't comment on specifically what happened. If we can get the address, we would love to look into it and respond.
Suited if we sort of triage those, because if you're getting one a month, I think they'll be able to handle those, hopefully. And it seems
that's
like
about one a week, but that's a significant number for
one a month earlier. So one a week, we can get these folks together and triage. Mr. Blumenfield, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. I'll try to be brief because of the time. Because I am actually getting quite a large, relatively speaking, we get multiple calls per week, and many folks who are taking in that 6 month. I assume it's because I'm in the West Valley where it's hot and where they probably do a lot more solar, but it seems like I like the numbers that I'm seeing there. They're not reflective at the moment of the calls that we're getting, because we're getting, and your office knows because we were in touch with you on some of these. Wanted to know, is some of the problem, sometimes I hear there's a disconnect in the inspection process between building and safety and DWP, where folks get caught in the middle. Building and safety approves it, and then DWP denies it, or vice versa. And the inspection green time doesn't really break out the difference. Could you talk to that issue a little bit?
Yeah, I can summarize this pretty briefly. So when a customer builds a system and they get a permit from LADBS, In addition to that permit, there's an internal system that signals to us that DBS has allowed us to stab a meter. And their success rate of updating that system was low for a little bit. And we actually had a lot of customers that fell into that gray area where they got a signal from LADBS that they have a permit, but LADBS had not communicated that to us. And so we've worked really closely with LADBS to improve the rate at which they update that system correctly. And we have actively been sending all of those customers, not sending the customers, but actually notifying LADBS to proactively fix and update their system. And they've been very cooperative and very helpful into updating that system. So that was a sort of a limbo state, if you will, that customers were getting caught in very often, but it's not happening anymore. And let me tell you a couple of reasons why that happens. One, it could be a mistake where LADBS just simply did not update their system. Two, it could be there was some other system, let's say a new electric panel that was installed that the customer didn't get a permit for. And in that case, they would have to go back to LADBS, get a permit for that, and get squared away with LADBS before we can proceed with their system. So there was a few cases of, they needed to complete some work with LADBS, but there were many cases where it just simply needed to be updated, and we can't tell whether it was a mistake or an omission, or they actually needed to fix something with LADBS. So we've taken all of those back to LADBS, asked them to update their system, and we're working through that. So we should see a substantially lower amount of those in the future.
And is that reflected in these numbers somehow, in terms of, like, where does that delay time fit in on these?
Right, so that delay time would be seen in the inspection time. So the time that the customer says, I'm ready to be inspected, we would say, well, not according to what we see with LADBS, and that's when we have to go back to LADBS and square that away with them. And again, that was a larger problem earlier this year, and we're seeing that level decline, and they're actively aware of it, and we're coordinating that with them on a more than a weekly basis to work those down.
And I know you increased the staff. Do you have enough staff at this point? Because I still get complaints from constituents say they call, then they get connected to it takes them 3 or 4 people before they actually get to somebody who knows or understands the solar project, and that's a consistent complaint we get. So is that a staffing issue? Or what is it?
Let me answer that one. The staffing issue is being resolved. They're putting more people on the hotline to handle the calls. They're getting to the point where they'll be able to not even leave a message, but they'll have a live answer, and they'll be able to answer that. They're also looking at building the solar responses into all the call centers so that it's part of their normal routine. Now, on the processing side, people want to talk about, well, how come I'm not being processed? Is there a problem? How do I fix it? And so we're starting a once a week open line where they can talk to the processing folks. So they're going to basically staff the phones, they're going to pick up live calls, they're going to be able to say, well, where's mine at? And the processors will be able to answer that. And so that is something that's going to be implemented over the next couple of weeks. And we think that high touch is going to be very effective. So it's something we're going to try. I know from an inspection perspective, they are hiring more people and have plans to hire additional people, and they are working very, very hard to ramp up their meter setter workforce. Long-term, buildings in solar with normal meter setting duties, so that is part of our core business, what we do every day. It's not special, it's not a boutique. That is the right strategy, and they're working very hard over the next month to 2 months to get all their staff in and get all their staff trained. So we think tremendous improvements will happen in the inspections.
To that end, why don't we hold the item in committee for 30 days and make sure that you all are sort of getting your answers, and we'll see some more experience. So why don't we call up Dan Chia? He's the only card on public testimony.
I'll just keep it very brief. We are hopeful and optimistic that the charts that you saw will continue their downward trajectory towards meeting standards that we think are the best practices compared to other utilities, investor-owned and other municipal utilities. So we are appreciative of DWP's hard work, appreciative of the Mayor's Office and its leadership, working closely with DWP to both push and encourage continued reforms. So we remain hopeful and optimistic that things will only get better.
Very good. Well, we appreciate the public comment. Colleagues, we'll hold that item in committee for 30 days so that we may sort of see where we are then. That being the case, we don't have any general public comment cards. We are adjourned.